Hello, welcome to Optimize for Humans. I'm your host, Usha. I am excited to be speaking with Jason Saunders today. Jason, welcome to the podcast. I'd love to start by asking you to share a little bit about who you are and what excites you about this topic.
Sure, Usha, and thanks for the opportunity. Good morning. My current title is Vice President of Strategic Partners at SailPoint, and I've been involved in a wide variety of technology companies at different sizes, shapes, and stages throughout my career. Most recently, spending a lot of time in the security space with
Mm,
Zscaler, Wiz, and now SailPoint. And obviously, AI is disrupting and accelerating at the same time. And really excited to talk about how it's impacting the attack surface, but how security companies are actually using that to our advantage to improve customer outcomes and certainly improve our employees' experience and productivity as well.
cool. Well, I want to start by asking you, what's your experience been when it comes to scaling agentic AI? That seems like a good chunk of your work is around that. What are you noticing as you approach that?
Yeah, so what we're seeing with agentic, it's a great question, by the way. The amount of use cases on a daily basis that continue to enter, the modern enterprise is obviously growing exponentially. And what we're seeing is that, at least from our lens, identity is now becoming, back to the center of the conversation because obviously identity was all around human identities for many, many years. Now we're talking about non-human identities certainly scaling, well past any number of human identities. And being able to tie your agentic usage and the agents back to people and making sure that you have the right governance framework and agentic fabric to wrap that together and give you the context you need to make decisions in real time is really where the identity space is and where it will continue to go, over the next several years. And we're pretty excited about that opportunity.
Yeah, can you say more about what you mean when you say identity?
Yeah, so if you think about like, any modern enterprise, right, you have certain applications and systems that you have access to on a daily basis. Some you access, right, on a regular basis every day, like your email or Slack, for example. Some are systems that maybe you only access, every other day, and some maybe rarely, right? Something from an HR related perspective where you have to update some information or something like that. And so that obviously making sure you have good governance and controls so that the right people have access to the right things across your enterprise has been around for a long time. But now if you think about the agents that are actually embedded in all of those use cases, embedded in those applications, or even custom agents that are now going and doing activities on your behalf behind the scenes of the applications or potentially behind the scenes of your infrastructure, HR, or other areas, being able to pull in those non-human identities and understand how they extend out into your environment, how they extend the access, how they extend the threat surface and the attack risk for your enterprise is super important. And we believe,
Yeah.
mission critical and certainly very important to, really thoughtful adoption of agentic going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, when it comes to like employees, we're really thoughtful about some of that, right? So each person has certain degree of access to different tools within the company. There are things you can touch, there are things you can't touch. There's like levels of approvals you have to go through. There's rules around all of this. And it seems like I think as we go into the agentic world, we're making it up as we go. And it's a little like the Wild West of actually what does it mean um and also knowing that the technology itself is like calibrating as we go along, right? We hear all of these different stories about autonomous decision making on the part of the AI that's led to certain consequences, some positive, some not, and whatnot. So that's a really interesting um it's a really interesting new world and frame that I think leaders need to be thinking about. And I do think the governance piece is the center pin of that. In the same way that you would have that for employees, it sounds like we have to have that for agents as well, and levels of control and access and all of these elements.
Yeah, 100%. I think governance is going to be the standard, not the exception here over the months and quarters to come. And again, as the proliferation of agentic continues to push out into new use cases, and the risk profile of again the models getting smarter, maybe the models kind of making decisions on their own, and then models being connected to other models and the complexity of that. Ultimately, having someone that those agentic, obviously decision making pieces are tied back to, so that we can hold them
Mhm.
accountable to make sure that the right guardrails, the right governance is in place at scale, is certainly going to be critical to successful adoption, and making sure that companies don't end up on the front of the Wall Street Journal for letting something agentic do something that may ruin the trust of either their consumers, their shareholders, or both.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we're definitely seeing more examples of this happening. I think of agents sort of going rogue here and there. And this accountability question, I think, becomes a real question. And, I think there's a tension that people are navigating between wanting to supercharge their work and their productivity and their speed. And part of that requires delegating more and more authority to the agents and delegating more and more work and responsibility to the agents. And then, the flip side of that tension is, the risk of that and accountability around that. And I guess, like, as a leader, how do you think about accountability in this context? Are you ultimately holding the human responsible who deployed the agent? What if there's a team working on this? Like, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think everyone's trying to ask or figure out, that same question in every enterprise. I think ultimately, accountability has to be across the entire team. It can't be a singular person, right? If you have any interaction, right, with this agentic system, as far as how it works, how it's deployed, how it's integrated, right, how it's expanded, use cases are going to impact the enterprise. You need to track that, right? And it shouldn't be single threaded to one individual because maybe they're the application owner, right? There needs to be granularity, historical context, and really, again, similar to the way identity has worked, right, in the human space, right? What are the folks, the administrators, right, the database folks, the application folks, anybody that's touching it around the life cycle of how that agent continues to evolve, work, right, enrich the value chain as you discussed so eloquently. But I think it's everybody. I don't think you can hold one single person accountable. You just have to understand,
Yeah.
right, what that visibility is end to end and who's touching it at what time, so that you can hold those
Mhm.
folks accountable. And if something does go wrong, you can quickly go back to understand, right, why it
Right.
went wrong, who specifically owned that specific outcome or activity in and around it, and how do you make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's interesting about that is I think now mistakes are also happening because of what we don't know that we don't know. I
For
don't
sure.
always think it's carelessness or people missing something. I think we are in the realm of there are things that, like we're all getting to know the agents and how they work. And I do think we're bumping into, we don't know that we didn't, things we don't know that we don't know, the unknown unknowns. And so, yeah, there's something to me about like, how do we, I think the guardrails should be around breaking things down, testing things more, and learning and sort of making your way through small bets into a bigger bet rather than trying a big thing and bumping into problems. And I think holding individuals accountable for that, because I don't know, I just think we need to be all prepared for more learning and more failures as we work our way through this. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to visibility. If you think about when the cloud, I'll just use the cloud era, right, and the adoption and the
Yeah.
hype cycle, right? History kind of repeats itself in that way, and we're in the middle of this hype cycle, right? Similar to when cloud was being adopted very aggressively. And if you think about it back then, similar to even things like open source, which I've worked at open source companies in the past, right? You had a lot of shadow IT adoption. You had people trying things in the background, people using services from Amazon, right, where maybe they weren't using the data center that was available internally at the time, right, or downloading open source tools and building applications, like we saw at MongoDB when we were trying to drive developer adoption of that platform when I worked there. And I think the first thing is visibility, and if you can have really good
Yeah.
granularity and discover right, which is what SailPoint actually delivers. We can drop a discovery agent in the environment, kind of show you all of the agentic things that are going on in your world. Because what we found is that most CISOs, only have visibility into a fraction of what is actually going on in the overall environment, which means their attack surface and the visibility of that attack surface,
Yeah.
right? Not only is it larger, but they don't really have the insights into that. So I think, again,
Yeah.
just like a lot of things, it comes down to that visibility. And then you can start mapping it back to what the right governance framework looks like, and making
Yeah.
sure, to your point, that things are adopted and used in a much more kind of sequential way versus, science experiments that might ultimately end up risking the company.
Yeah, there's so much to be said, I think, around like the visibility and transparency component. And I think there's a sort of just like a technical component to that, which is just like how are you mapping it, how are you tracking the map, etc. But I think there's also a human component to that, which is how are you making it safe for people to take risks, to try things, and to recover from that, to learn quickly and adapt. And there's a psychological safety component there that I think is more important than ever as part of this.
Agreed.
Switching gears a little bit, I know when we spoke, you talked a little bit about how there's just so much more noise in the system right now, and it's now just getting more and more difficult to discern like what is noise and what is signal, and how do you kind of support your team in discerning the signal versus the noise, and we're all kind of in a swirl right now. I definitely feel that, and I know a lot of people have mentioned that. So I'm curious about how you're experiencing that challenge, and would just love to explore that with you.
Yeah, I think, at a very practical level, I'm encouraging my team to use the AI tools or AI capabilities that we have in house to improve their productivity or improve their quality of life, so to speak, and automate some of the things that may have taken them a long time before. I'm encouraging them to record calls like this one, and transcribe things so we don't lose action items in certain key calls. Can you
Yeah.
build certain presentations? Can you automate some of the obviously very, very manual tasks and leverage that? And then look outside, but also don't just adopt AI for the sake of adoption, because sometimes it actually creates more work, or it creates
Yeah.
things that may look cool, but are they really practical or applicable to driving true real productivity? So just encouraging the team to kind of interrogate new opportunities, and make sure that they use the tools that they have to the best of their ability. But for us, the transcription has been amazing. The ability to kind of automatically build presentations, business presentations, populate complex spreadsheets, just do those things really almost instantaneously. And then on the product side of things, obviously it's given our development team the ability to code. And frankly, everybody in the world now to code at a speed that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
Obviously, developer productivity, seems to be the largest and the most productive use case for all of AI, as we see with companies like Windsurf and Cursor and many others.
Yeah.
So that's what I've seen so far. But as you mentioned, every day is an evolving learning journey, and we're trying to look out ahead to see if there's other opportunities, for other platforms that might be able to drive productivity in a unique way. For us specifically, if you think about migration, we have a lot of customers that are migrating from legacy platforms to new cloud-based platforms in and around identity. And typically in the past, it would take a lot of time and energy to get through those migrations. AI is going to, help our customers get on the next generation of our platform and adopt future functionality in a fraction of the time, right? And I'm talking about, 12-month timelines going to 3 months, which is really meaningful to help them kind of stay ahead of the curve. So that's just a little bit of an insight, both from my team's perspective, right, on the ground, but also how it's impacting some of the larger initiatives that we're driving as a company.
Yeah, I think so much in there around like I guess again like the tension that stands out is, the importance of trying new things, and I do think that's going to be continuing. It's such an evolving landscape that I think it is important to keep like turning over different rocks to see where it's applicable to the extent that it's applicable. And then the flip side of that is keeping our eye on the ball. I do feel like that's a tension that we're all struggling with a little bit right now because there is a little bit of FOMO. I do think there's a lot of FOMO driven behavior all around right now, and like deep, genuine fear of not just missing out, but missing the boat somehow. And not upskilling ourselves in time around a technology that is impacting so much of our world. And the flip side of that is what's the extent, what are the interventions that are actually genuinely improving productivity? Where is this enhancing, the impact that we want to have, and where is this actually just kind of draining our time and energy?
I think that balance is key, right? It's easy to get sucked into a lot of conversations that lead to don't lead to productivity or don't lead to an outcome that you actually want to drive. So, yeah, sifting through that, just like you would sift through, information on any topic, and making decisions based on more facts and data. And if there isn't enough facts and data to support it, maybe waiting till there's a little bit more information before you make a decision is definitely prudent. So, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to ask you, Jason, is you've been a part of multiple different organizations at different scales. What is one piece of advice that you have for leaders around building teams that really thrive with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to first start before you even get into AI with, my philosophy is you want to build a subculture that, the people that work with and for you can kind of thrive in, that values them, that values, what they do, and that you're always, spending time to be a servant type of leader, not being too big for any problem, jump in, be hands on, be willing to do the work. That your team is doing and being able to support them any way, and kind of drowning out any of the noise that may kind of leak into the organization that may take you away from the focus, and the execution ultimately that you're trying to drive. Because at the end of the day, great teams and great companies out execute their competitors by blocking out the noise, right, so to speak,
Yeah,
and maintaining focus and kind of creating a culture internally where we all share best practices. We all work with each other, but we're all hyper focused, and we don't worry about the ups and downs of the outside world, and some of the negativity, positivity, whatever it is, right? That
yeah,
might kind of creep into the organization from time to time based upon the market or any other dynamics. I think from an AI perspective, back to what I mentioned earlier, just encouraging the adoption across the entire team of the things that we know are working. Sometimes you have someone that is, more of a leader in that area. And, I uncover that obviously in my one-on-ones. And if someone is using something to their advantage and that they think it's, valuable and they're able to kind of show that, being able to just quickly share that across the team so that we can all benefit obviously is low hanging fruit. So for me, it's really about building that subculture and that collaboration internally, and making that kind of a day to day expectation, so that it becomes really part of the DNA of the team. And then the adoption and the productivity and the things that you want to use from an AI perspective ultimately will be magnified as a result of the subculture and the way that your team works together. I think that's the most important.
yeah. I mean, I really resonate with that, like the principles based approach and the sort of people first approach of you know, focus on that first and foremost, and then all of the other pieces fit into that versus focusing on the tools and forgetting the people components around that. And I'm struggling with that a little bit in that I think we are in a moment in time where it's becoming increasingly harder to really stay in the human-centered lens of things because of the kind of noise around things and because of the economic impacts of how this is evolving and the pressure that I think a lot of leaders are genuinely facing from the top to, do more with less and we have all kinds of other layoffs and things that are in the mix as well. I'm curious how you think about that and for a leader who's facing that pressure and wanting to be human centered at the same time, what are your thoughts on how they navigate that?
Yeah, I think, control what you can control. Right? You have a job to do. And, for us right now, the biggest challenge is that the landscape of the job that we're doing, which is building very strategic partnerships and either scaling
Mhm.
them, pivoting them into other areas, upskilling them, right, into other new opportunities is the job. And this job maybe 5 years ago was pretty much steady state. It was kind of mundane. You get up, you kind of do the same things, easy to predict success. Where now the ground and the landscape is kind of shifting underneath you every day. And I think I've just encouraged my team to be intellectually curious, to be flexible, right, and to also, like, if you have conviction like we do on a pivot that your business needs to make, relentless focus on that pivot, and the speed that you need to make that pivot. In years past, maybe you could have taken a year to make that pivot, or 9 months. Now, if you don't make that pivot in 3 months or 6 months, you're giving up a lot to your competitors, or you're missing out on an opportunity in the
Yeah.
market because of how fast the market's moving. So I think just the fluid, right, and the fluidity and the
Yeah.
flexibility of your day to day, right, needs to be different. And from my world, I've worked at startups where you have to be like that every day. And so I'm just trying to inject that into a larger scale at a company, right, that's over $1 billion in revenue. But we need to operate with a kind of a nimbleness, right, of a startup that may be 20 or 30 million, that needs to be able to kind of navigate changes at every level. And that's what I'm trying to kind of impart with my team. And for the most part, they've embraced it. I don't think we figured it out completely yet. But again, if you have a good subculture, right, and you're able to lead in that way, I think people, and then people see the results of it. Obviously, it'll become something that is just normal, so to speak, or part of the fabric of our organization. But that's what I work on every day.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in that, but I love and want to emphasize that last piece of like that's something you cultivate every single day, right? It's in how you show up, and I agree wholeheartedly about I think the landscape is shifting, and actually we need every team to really take ownership for the impact they want to have and be nimble in how they get there and continue to, take risks and evolve, learn quickly and evolve in a way that I think there's more pressure to do that, to actually operate with that kind of agility in a way that we haven't quite experienced to this degree before. And I do think like timelines are compressed and things are moving very differently. And to your point, I think some of the cultural elements become really crucial in that the trust within a team, the trust between the team and the leader, and all of these things. And I do think that's going to be more important, not less. And yeah, and there's something to in there too around like navigating the balance of that in a win-win, like find the win-win scenarios in this. And the more we, I think, polarize into either or, the more we do ourselves a disservice as part of all of this.
Yeah, completely agree.
Jason, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me and sharing your experience and expertise.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and look forward to catching up again real soon.